It's like 8 months overdue. I know. Everything's going well though?
Yes, I will see you.
Any complaints? Yeah. Well, thanks again. I'll talk to you after.
Hey, phone on vibrate. Yeah. That was a
Good evening. Gavel to order the November 16, 2016 meeting of the Oversight Committee. Take a roll.
Councilor Kane. Councilor Paul.
Present.
Councilor DeBona.
Present.
Councilor Finn.
Present.
Councilor Harris.
Present.
Councilor Hughes. Councilor LaFars. Councilor Leeang.
Present.
Chairman Dominici.
Present. That's good enough. All right. At the outset, Councilor Hughes and Councilor LaForest both had prior commitments this evening. Councilor LaForest is at a Department of Transportation meeting, I think, relative to a major repaving, roadway work in her ward. Councilor Hughes is at a debate where I trust she will lose. But either way, they, right, Nina? Yeah.
Thank you.
Either way, they both had previous engagements, couldn't be here, but we'll follow along with this legislation as we move forward. Just at the outset, kind of want to give I refuse to read the open meeting law rule. If you're at a public meeting, expect to be videotaped or audio taped. Common sense. Just kind of to lay out the agenda for the evening. The committee has invited, through me as chair, have invited several organizations and individuals to speak tonight on the legislation. We're here meeting on 3 pieces of legislation. Council Order 2016-15, which is an order related to the underground economy, the misclassification of employees on construction sites. 2016-074, which is an amendment to the zoning special permit 9.4, and 2016-137. Oh, that's the new one. We're also here on. Oh, no, that's right. 2016-137, which is an amendment to Title 15, adding a new section to Title 15 entitled Wage Theft Prevention. Councilor DeBona and Councilor Finn were the original authors that kind of, they authored the resolution relative to the underground economy and the misclassification of employees on construction sites that led this body to begin deliberations and hearings on the matter. Through that, this is our 3rd meeting on this subject. The first meeting, we had a couple of folks come up and testify before the body relative to the issue of the underground economy and why it was bad, and how it's happening throughout the Commonwealth, not just in Quincy. I believe Mark Groen made a PowerPoint presentation to me at that point. As a result of that, as chairman of this committee, I drafted two ordinances, 74 and 137, which sought to provide a remedy to the issues that were raised at the second hearing, which we had, I don't have the dates when we had this, but at the second hearing, we invited and heard from testimony from representatives from the insurance industry. There were several insurance companies represented, folks who specialize in workers' compensation insurance. We also had a member of the IFB, the Insurance Fraud Bureau, who talked about this issue and gave testimony to the committee. And we also had testimony from an Assistant Attorney General from the Labor Relations Department of the AG's office. Based on all of that, and I'll take Chairman liberty here, based on all of that, I think it's fair to say that this body is well aware or is well informed that there is an issue going on both in Quincy and throughout the Commonwealth. And that came from the testimony of the Assistant Attorney General, who said they would love to have additional help from municipalities in enforcing some of the laws that are on the books. Quite frankly, she told us they don't have the manpower to keep up with it. Although there are state regulations against some of the behavior we've heard about, they don't have the manpower to keep up with it. These pieces of legislation were a response to that request for additional help from municipalities, for Quincy to do our part, and making sure that certain laws are followed, and that is the goal of the legislation that's before this committee. What I'd like to do, and what I hope tonight we'll do, is one, allow an opportunity for some additional folks to come and provide testimony on these two pieces of legislation that are pending before the committee from both sides of, not both sides of the aisle, but I guess from all different facets. I invited, how many people did I invite? Approximately 65 people to speak before us. Luckily, they all didn't say yes. We have a handful of folks who are going to speak tonight, and then what I'd like to do is that approximately 30 to 45 minutes perhaps. And then what I'd like to do is open it up to the councilors for deliberation. Whether or not we vote on this tonight will be the will of the body, but for those of you who may or may not know the procedure in this body, the City Council as a whole, that matters are taken up under the subcommittee, which the Oversight Committee is, and it can come to a vote in the subcommittee for approval or disapproval in terms of a recommendation to the overall body. The overall body at a City Council meeting would have to adopt the measures as a City Council. So we are not meeting tonight as a City Council, we're meeting tonight as an Oversight Committee. So whether or not we take a vote tonight, it really doesn't make too much of a difference either way. It's just a recommendation of the body. As you see, there's a majority of councilors here. We could always, at any other full City Council meeting, take the matter out of committee and vote on it then. So, do any councilors have anything to say before we get started with some of our invited guests? Okay. The only other thing I want to state to anybody else here, or anyone who's going to provide testimony, that this hearing and the purposes of this hearing are to learn more and receive information and input about the legislation that's pending. This hearing is not about one company, it's not about one union, it's not about one labor organization, it's not about unions per se, it's not about contractors per se. From my perspective, and I drafted 2 of the 3 pieces of legislation here, it's about holding people accountable to following the law and making sure that everybody's on the same playing field from a business standpoint. That's the purpose. So I would remind folks, if they're going to provide testimony tonight, to please speak to those issues, and I will gladly swing the hammer if necessary to hold people to that admonition. So Without further ado, I'm just going to run through the list of folks that I have here. Is Doug Morrison here? Present. You want to come on up? Doug Morrison, Vice President, Chief Operations Officer at Callahan Construction. And I'll say I invited several individuals from the construction industry, from large organizations like yourself, who does a lot of work both in the city and throughout the state, and some smaller local ones. I invited the folks from Galvin Construction. Didn't hear back as to whether or not they would be their town. We'll see if they are available. Mr. Morrison, if you would, you've had an opportunity. We sent you the copies of the legislation, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The podium is yours.
Wonderful, thank you.
I didn't turn it on. Hold on. It's yours. No, okay. There you go. That's better.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you for having me here. My hope is that I could be allowed to read a statement since I'm a pretty horrendous public speaker. So if I could read that before answering questions, or
Sure.
that works for you, sir. So my thanks to the City Council for the invitation to speak before the Ordinance and Oversight Committees. My name is Doug Morrison. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Callahan Construction Managers of Bridgewater, Mass., where I've worked for the Callahan family for the last 18 years. We, as a company, are excited to help work together with your team and to be part of the solution of eliminating unfair labor practices. We've reviewed the proposed legislation relative to the underground economy and the misclassification of employees on construction sites, specifically with those orders that you indicated earlier, numbers 2016-015, 74, and 137. And we agree wholeheartedly with the council on the intent of the orders.
Is that the end of your statement? You're all done? You can sit down there.
I only have 12 more pages.
Okay, go ahead.
So we agree wholeheartedly with the intent of the orders, namely helping to better protect the individual worker. Unfortunately, we have a number of disagreements with how the orders are worded, as to us they appear far too vague as currently drafted. At Callahan, we've put a number of practices in place that I'll share in a few minutes, which might make sense to incorporate in these or similar orders. So, however, let me start by stepping back quickly here, giving you an overly simplified view of the typical process of constructing a project, which most of you already understand. On private projects, it often starts with the developer coming to the city with a plan to create a new building, which we'll call the project. The developer submits preliminary plans to the city for approval. There's an approval process by the city and ultimately an agreed upon project emerges. The developer hires a team of architects, engineers, etc. to design the project and ultimately hires a general contractor or construction manager to manage the building of the project. The majority of construction managers, like us at Callahan, do not perform any of the actual work on the project. Most of the time, all of the work on a project is subcontracted to other companies. Again, on private projects, as plans develop, the construction manager puts the project out to bid to possibly hundreds of subcontractors and asks them to provide pricing on the project. The construction manager reviews these proposals from subs, establishes a final value for the work, which is then presented to the developer. The developer and the CM negotiate and ultimately arrive at the fixed price to build the project. The developer and construction manager then enter into a contract to build the project and agree together on which of the hundreds of subcontractors should be brought onto the team to construct the project. Team members, or subcontractors, are chosen based on a large number of factors, including items like availability of manpower, history of completing similar projects, financial strength of their firm, their inclusion of all the proper scope items required, their safety record, their ability to meet the schedule, and of course, ultimately, it's part of it, but it's the price of their work. Once chosen, the selected subcontractor must sign a contract with the construction manager, agreeing to a long list of items, like we just talked about, like supplying the proper products, meeting the project schedule, working safely, paying their suppliers and employees, and paying proper taxes. A standard subcontract from virtually any construction manager in Massachusetts and probably the United States has language that requires all subcontractors to comply with all state and federal laws, including wage laws. Without fail, every single subcontractor agrees in writing to comply with all state and federal laws of every fashion and type, including each of those listed in the orders mentioned previously. With that background established, as to how projects come to fruition, let's look at the specific issues. First, misclassification of employees. Mass General Law, Chapter 149, Section 148B, defines misclassification. I'm a layman, so I'll give you my definition of that. My definition is that that a subcontractor utilizes an individual for a given scope of work. Instead of paying them as an employee with the proper taxes withheld, the overtime rates adhered to, and providing coverage of workers' compensation insurance, that employer, and it's typically a subcontractor, he pays them as an independent contractor. This saves the sub the cost of paying taxes, overtime, and payment of insurance. These savings allow the subcontractor to offer lower prices and increase his profits on the project. Keep in mind that the misclassification of employees is not something that the construction manager does. It's an act committed by the sub and their sub-subs. This issue is an industry-wide issue and extends to both union and non-union firms looking to beat the system and save money. It hurts all legitimate subcontractors who are trying to compete with the offending subcontractors. It increases the personal risk of individual workers who go without insurance coverage. Those subcontractors that follow this practice commit both tax fraud and insurance fraud. Because of the negative ramifications for the individual worker and the government, we wholeheartedly condemn the practice and will take whatever steps are available to us to ensure that this does not incur on any projects that Callahan is involved with. The second issue is the underground economy. This term applies to the practice of employing legal workers and/or paying these workers or employees in cash, if at all. The savings, again, accrues to the subcontractor if he follows this practice, which would allow his proposal to be more competitive and ultimately more profitable. There's no advantage to the construction manager to utilize a subcontractor that follows this policy. Again, as with the misclassification of employees, we wholeheartedly condemn the practice as illegal and unethical. Now, as these ideas relate to the orders proposed by the council, we fully support the idea of reducing wage theft and eliminating the underground economy. And we want to work with the council in crafting orders that accomplish this. However, we have a few issues with the current orders as written. First, the two orders that as written are too vague and open-ended. For example, in the order regarding special permits, item 9.4.9.
For the record, that's 2016 gesture.
Thanks. Item 9.4.9 in the second paragraph indicates, and I quote, that firm has not, in the past 3 years, been found in violation of any law applicable to its contracting business. The emphasis was added to the word any. So, found in violation of any law. This, as written, is way too vague and broad for an order which is directed at correcting wage violations. Similarly, the end of that paragraph states, and I quote, that wage and hour laws, prevailing wage laws, environmental laws, or others, end quote. The or others specifically leaves the definition up to the discretion of an individual and is not concrete and specific. Further, the idea of being in violation, again in quotes, is also not spelled out clearly enough. I could touch on several other examples, but in the interest of time, I will say that as currently written, the orders are too vague.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, through you. Oh, I'm sorry. You know, I'm just going to turn everybody's mics on and just use this courteous with each other.
I'm not sure that's wise to leave them.
I'll leave those in Councilor Harris as well.
I just want to make a note before it proceeds that even if you're not going to cover these, it would be helpful if you include them in writing as part of the record in terms of those things.
The other examples.
Exactly. Right.
Sure.
We're not going to cover them.
I did not come prepared to give you something tonight.
No,
I'll
it's fine.
certainly get that to you in the coming weeks. Okay.
Because like I said, even if we approve this tonight, the full body has to approve it at a later date.
Gotcha.
We can still make amendments. Like I have an amendment to make when you're done speaking, and I forgot to make, as the author, I'll make an amendment. But go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The second issue that we have with the order is the special permit order will be extremely damaging to developers in the city if special permits are, in quotes, temporarily suspended and all construction work on the entire project ceases immediately, end quote. As noted in the paragraph following 9.4.9.6. It will also directly impact the other workers on the project when the project is shut down. Additionally, because of this risk of shutdown, developers will be especially leery of bringing new projects to the city, which will directly cause a loss of city revenue, which is the byproduct, obviously, of new development. More risk, less development, less revenue. Issue 3, any shutdown of a project affects all workers on the project instead of just the offending subcontractor. While I'm sure this is not the intent of the language as it is written, it is certainly the outcome if a project is suspended for any reason. Item 4, the remedies noted in 9.4.10 or 9.4.10 are again vague and open-ended, with no agreement on how violations are to be remedied. The responsibility to determine that a violation exists, then to determine what the remedy is. These items being added to the building commissioner's list of responsibilities does not seem to us prudent or manageable. That said, the following things are a list of items that we at Callahan are doing currently, and that any construction manager can do to reduce or help mitigate these violations. Number 1, pre-qualify subcontractors and their sub-subs at every level, including background checks to see if things like wage violation incidents have happened in the past. Number 2, have strong language in all subcontracts that clearly identifies to subcontractors the laws that already exist for this type of violation at the state and federal level. Subcontract language must forbid subcontractors from these violations. Number 3, badge every worker at the site. This badging process requires that every individual at the site provide proof that they are eligible to work legally in the United States, that they have identified their employers. Do not allow unbadged workers to remain on site. Item 4, provide evidence of workers' compensation insurance coverage for all employers working on the site, including subs of our subcontractors. Number 5, post multilingual notices and signage and provide a hotline for complaints regarding wage violations. Number 6, provide a system of periodic auditing by requesting payroll records from a sub and comparing it to the badge logs maintained at the site. Number 7, work with subs that are found to be in violation of these requirements to get and keep them in compliance. In addition, we would welcome the ability to work with the City Council to provide transparency in the process, wherein language could be adopted and included in every subcontract which would allow somebody like a city compliance monitor the right to periodically audit subcontractor payroll records directly to ensure compliance. We would also welcome some type of fine system that would be enacted by the city directly against the offending subcontractors. This process would help add teeth to current legislation and make subcontractors much more aware of the urgency of providing properly for their workers. My final recommendation would be that this be tabled and discussed. We would love to be part of the discussion of it and the opportunity to work with you in helping to establish a reputable and responsible program to end wage violations in Quincy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Don't go anywhere. Council, does anybody have any questions?
Councilor Finn?
Councilor Crowe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you, Mr. Morrison. Good evening. Just listening to you sort of take us through the breakdown, if you will, as you see it in these orders. And I don't know how much you know or are aware, or not aware, but this body, I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe in the last year or so, we were asked in one of our FY budgets to approve a compliance manager due to the noticeable growth in Quincy, and all of the large, dense residential projects taking place. Now, I'm not sure the latitude that individual has when they go on to the job site, but I would imagine that it's pretty wide. And what I mean by that is I would assume that they're at their discretion able to engage with individuals that are working across all trades on that particular project and be able to verify certain employment type stuff. And maybe you know the answer to that. It'll lead me to my second question.
I guess I didn't understand the question. You said that you've hired
We have a
a
compliance manager.
compliance manager. I think that's fantastic. We would be
Right.
happy to work with them and coming up with whatever transparent methods there are to help do this kind of stuff and to help document the people and the subcontractors that are on site.
Yes, I mean, I think we'd all agree, the end game here, is basically putting people out of, basic, quality of life, they're entitled to a paycheck and benefits, at, subcontractors' expense. It's something that none of us, agree with, for sure. Now, as I listen to you sort of take us through your compliance model and sort of the metrics and, certain breakers that you guys have in your company, how do those, that protocol sort of like mesh with, when you come to work in the city? Like, how could we take that compliance checklist that you just laid out, right? Work badges and verifying payroll and all those other things, and make sure that the city personnel is looped in and we're kind of all attacking or mitigating or, in a perfect world, eliminating this, this classification of workers.
So to take you around the subject, in public work, this process already exists. This is the certified payroll process, where certified payrolls are submitted to the owner, and the compliance monitor or someone on the owner's side, the city's side, will review payroll, will review classification of employees, will review rates being paid, etc. On the private side, which is where I'm living 99% of the time, we don't have certified payrolls. So the process that we have laid out is essentially a certified payroll, but it's not called that. So we have a periodic audit system where we can check a subcontractor's payrolls and confirm that the men on site who are listed on site are actually getting a paycheck. And we can confirm that the rates being paid, are greater than minimum requirements, that they're being paid overtime, that they have insurance, etc. So I don't see why a compliance monitor for the city couldn't ask for the same records for subcontractor on a job. I don't see any difference there.
Okay. So it could be a duplication of efforts.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Carlo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Morrison, for coming in this evening. But I'd like to go back to the initial premise here, but in terms of the relationship between so-called construction managers and subcontractors. And I'm not saying that we're suggesting this, but there's some sense as though the construction managers have no control over these subcontractors who may be implementing such practices on site.
I would answer that by saying that we have a contract, that I as a construction manager have a contract with a subcontractor that lays out all of these things that the subcontractor must do. He must abide by state and federal wage laws.
Okay, I understand that the contracts are in place, but I guess the question I'm asking would be, don't you, or again, not you specifically, but construction managers generally, shouldn't they have some responsibility of, you can sign contracts and then turn a blind eye? Because it strikes me that there's some incentive, particularly if subcontractors are driving costs down, that affects the construction manager as much as it affects that subcontractor. So the question is, in other words, the bids that you put out to bid, and you've got much lower bids in relation to it, doesn't the construction manager have to bear some responsibility or accountability, particularly if companies are getting dinged again and again for dealing with subcontractors with known histories of abusing the system?
So again, I will say what we are doing, okay? There are policies and procedures that we have put in place at Callahan to avoid this very thing. We want to pre-qualify our subcontractors. We want to make sure that they're doing business legally. We want to periodically audit their payrolls to make sure that.
Are these things you do have implemented?
Absolutely. That said, should I be held responsible for them?
Well, if again and again and again, it's the same situation, it seems to be the same construction manager, then I would think, yeah, there should be some level of accountability in relation to that.
So can you?
Because again, if it's a matter of simply driving profits and costs at the risk of these values, it would seem to me that any ordinance that we would have would hold construction managers as accountable as much as we would certain subcontractors.
Yes. So perhaps you missed the point that the subcontractors and their sub-subs are the ones who are misclassifying and doing the unethical payment practices here.
No, I don't miss that at all. But there's a sense out there just from, and I've been on this body for 16 years and I've seen different projects that have gone on for many years, and one gets the impression the construction managers, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but it seems as though they turn a blind eye to it because it benefits them as much as it does the subcontractor and the subcontracting scams that they're pulling off. And so I just feel that in some way, and again, I think what you added is very helpful, but in terms of this as an ordinance, in some ways, it needs to also be able to hold those construction managers for making certain that they're making full effort in the same manner to protect those very values. And again, if it means, I mean, for example, you're putting all, you have all this stuff now presently, badging workers on site?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Morrison, for being here today. Thank you for starting off the meeting.
Thank you, Councilor DeMona, for being here, even though you're feeling ill.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming.
I wouldn't miss us. Wouldn't miss us. Just elaborate a little bit on Mr. Kroll, Councilor Kroll, and Councilor Finn. Just a little bit, we've had a couple hearings on this prior, and you've been discussed at length here in this, well, not necessarily you,
Oh.
your Callahan Construction in general. Just a little bit about this, having the subcontractor on site, and then there's another sub on top of that subcontractor. Did that in itself, does that take the liability off of you totally?
It's a good question. I look at this in a jaded point of view. I'm a construction manager, right? I think every individual who owns a business is responsible for what they do. I believe that somebody should be responsible for doing something wrong. That said, I believe that I should not be responsible for my neighbor to pay his own taxes. So I should be responsible for myself. So ultimately, I think that the subcontractor who commits these fraud and wage violations is the person that needs to be responsible and not the construction manager.
Okay, just to go a little further on that. There's been times where, XYZ company comes in, they get in trouble for whatever they do, misclassification, or somebody gets hurt in a job, something happens and they fold, and they come back as a new company, ABCD. They come on, it's the same group of people. Is that happening on your sites at all? Is that happening with Callahan Construction? Are you giving this contractor or subcontractor, bringing anybody back into the fold, which is basically the same company, or the same group of bodies, men and women?
I will say that we have brought contractors back in the past. Yes, we have.
With you saying that here, sometimes, you say to yourself, like, if I was doing business with somebody, and they were doing something illegally, or they're not doing it correctly, whether not on books or whatever, I would say, listen, you're a liability, I can't have it on my site. It's a body sitting here tonight, I mean, there's a lot of people in the audience here tonight, talk about fairness and being on a fair playing field. There's a lot of construction going on, especially in the city of Quincy. I want to make sure that when development's happening, it's happening correctly. And, people get, I don't know if the ledger's here tonight, if they get a hold of somebody that gets hurt on a site, it's in the papers, and they look, a body like this wants to come forward and make sure that there's got to be some type of liability at the top of the food chain, which is the top, company of construction. It's just that, at this point, we started off with you. We're looking to see accountability, liability, and making sure that you're going to hold up to what you're saying tonight.
Sure, absolutely. So just to step back, you asked if we had brought companies back that are operating under different names. So we have, with certain stipulations in effect. One, we might be joint paying them and their suppliers. Two, we might be doing payroll records with them on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So there's always, when we agree to bring somebody back that has operated in the construction industry previously, we make sure they're doing stuff legally now. I also want you to know that the fact that somebody has done something wrong in the past doesn't mean today that they're doing something wrong today. So there has to be some opportunity for them to do business in Massachusetts if they can do business. If they're registered and legal to do business in Massachusetts, then it should be allowed them the opportunity to do it.
We as a body here sit here tonight and we do something wrong, and we might disbar and no longer be a counselor. We have a code and a liability that accountability that we have to, sign and go under it. So to be very honest with you, just as a body for myself, I don't want to see people trying to beat the system. I just want an even playing field. And, going forward, to be honest with you, I see you guys everywhere. You guys have a lot of contracts throughout the city of Quincy, all throughout the state of Massachusetts. And I know right off the bat because your signs up there right away. So, take a step further. What do you have going on right now in the city of Quincy? What are your construction sites?
We have a Marina Bay project. We have Crown Colony. The zero kind of job is just finished the demo building.
So you have some of the bigger developments going on here.
Correct.
And you did do the YMCA.
Correct.
In the last few years. I thank you for coming here tonight. At least coming in front of the public and answering questions from us or anybody else. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Leanne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening. I want to thank you for coming here tonight. Councilor DeMille, you said it up in there is liability on all of our ends and responsibility on all of our ends. And it doesn't just start with the developer, it starts with us. That's our responsibility tonight being up here, and I commend you for bringing this in front of us because, these ordinances, I believe, are living documents. And this is the first draft. We're going to have second, third, and fourth drafts, and that's why we have all of you here tonight, to give us input. Because me personally, I have experience with outfitting 1,000-square-foot restaurants, but not large developments like all of you guys have here. So the more feedback we have, the more amendments we can make to tighten this up. But you're absolutely right, Councilman. It's our responsibility. It starts with us to put out regulations and make sure that subsequent developers and workers are in line with that. So I want to ask you specifically about the let's see here, order number 2016-74 in 9.4.9. That last paragraph you had mentioned the language special permit shall be deemed temporarily suspended, and all construction work on the entire project shall cease until further notice by the building commissioner. You said that language is not necessarily agreeable because it's going to turn away developers if you cease an entire project. Should you find one person or two people or three people that are subcontractors in violation, you shouldn't necessarily stop the entire project as a whole. Now, I know they don't register in the car, they're gonna tow it, right? And they're not gonna let me drive the car again until I move forward and register my car. Now, my sister and I would share a car. So, you know, if I don't register my car and I don't renew it, she has a responsibility she has a vested interest to say to me, you better go and do this because both of us are at stake here. So there's more urgency on me to do the right thing. You know, if we, my approach to this and my feeling on this is if we just say this one person in violation will just get fired and can't work with us anymore, I feel like it takes away responsibility from people around them to be a little bit more proactive. And I think that's what we're all trying to get at is, you know, we can put strong regulations in place, but what I feel like it is lacking right now is, you know, sort of a collective effort from everyone on site and off site to do what they can and do their part, because things are happening on a day-to-day basis, and there's might be some folks that are going to be on site that can catch these things happening. So what do we do to encourage people to be more proactive? What do we do to encourage that collective effort? And I think it's possible when you bring responsibility on everyone. I'm not saying that I'm not open to hearing some language that can help us move toward a direction that might be agreed upon. So to that, do you have any suggestions or recommendations on what we can do instead of saying we're going to stop the project completely? What do you recommend if you find a violation?
The idea of stopping a project completely, to me, is not the answer to the problem.
And I'm open to, I think we're all here and open to
Again, I think because of the wording of this right now, there is things like licensing, prompt pay, environmental, tax laws, et cetera, which are these very broad and nebulous stipulations and regulations that are in effect already. So the idea that a violation of them is not a concrete and hard enough term. Because what is a violation? Is it not having paid your taxes? Is it filling out a form wrong 2 years ago and then correcting that but the paperwork hasn't caught up yet? So in my mind, I think there's opportunity I think that you have to have somebody be able to adjudicate the matter and say, wait a minute, is this a real item, or is this just the idea of a problem? Is this just the smell of gas in the air, or is there actually smoke? I didn't put those together right, but is there smoke or is there fire? If there's fire, then what are we going to do about it? Let's start by finding the company that's doing that. Let's increase that to something stronger than that as time goes on if they do not get in compliance. Again, I look at it saying this is a specific issue that needs to be addressed, and if there is a concrete item that the city council could say, you're putting this in your subcontracts when you do work in our city, and we are going to hold the subcontractors responsible for this and go after them, then a subcontractor will know pretty quickly that he needs to play by the rules and not cheat here. So that's a long-winded answer of saying I don't think stopping the project is the right way to do it. It's just there's too much at stake to do that for everyone, including the other guys that are working right next to it that have nothing to do with it. So again, I would love to sit and banter this across the table and come up with the right way to do it, but I can't tell you today what the right way to do it is.
Okay, I mean, you did talk about the process and how the general manager or the construction manager, does negotiate contracts. And in that contract, I would assume that it stipulates work environment and badges and applications and everything that you listed out. And so, could you say that if you were in violation of this contract that everyone agreed to, that is reason enough to stop the project to get it done and get it done quickly, so everyone can get back to work but under the right conditions? Do you understand what I'm saying? Because everyone comes to an agreement on that contract before the work starts. So if you're in violation of that contract, I believe that should be enough to say, there's an issue here, it needs to be addressed quickly to move forward.
Let me make sure I'm understanding you. When I sign a contract with a developer to build City Hall, Callahan is signing a contract, the construction manager is signing a contract with the city of Quincy for a specific thing. The 60 subs that are going to work on the job are not signing that same contract. So they are signing what's going to turn out to be a flow-down contract to them that is going to get the key points of the big contract and get it into their contract, of which all of these wage and misclassification issues are there already. So, I mean, these laws exist in Massachusetts already, right? So the AG's office has come and said, we can't manage this, we're looking for help. So we are here to help discuss that.
Her hands like that, but.
I'm sorry.
I see if I can help.
Thank you. Now you got me all confused here. So,
Well, she needs support from local cities and towns.
correct. And with that, we are here to provide help and input on it. Again, I just will stick by my idea that stopping the project will not work here. It will not work.
No, I appreciate your input. Like I said, I just, I'm in full support of this. I think, like I said, it's a living document that will continue to be refined to what works and what doesn't work. But I think this is a great start for all of us instead of being reactive to something, be a little bit more proactive. So I appreciate your time and input.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Leeang. This is why I'm going for Council President for me to last to speak. I like that, it's against my nature. Mr. Morrison, I really do appreciate you being here. I appreciate Callahan Construction sending someone here tonight. I'm glad you're willing and the company's willing to be a part of the process. So let me apologize in advance if my prosecutorial nature takes over as we're asking questions. As a ward council, we get a lot of calls from residents and folks who have concerns. What we never do is say, people call me and complain. We say, people call me with concerns and issues. So I drafted these two documents just at the outset. When you stand up there and say, these are the issues with the document as drafted, it's hard not to take a little bit of offense to that. I can understand if you have some constructive thoughts on them, or if you have some issues with them, that's fine. But I'm more insulted, actually, by the fact that you're asking us to table it tonight. And when Councilor Leeang says to you, well, if you don't like shutting down a job, which I drafted it, to me, that's the only thing that's going to get people's attention. Okay? A fine is a speeding ticket. Okay? We're going to take the car away until people can responsibly drive the car. That's why it's that language is the way it is. But when she asked you, well, what would you like to see happen instead? You said, I can't tell you today what the right way is. So we sent you the legislation. I sent you the legislation to get your feedback so that you could tell us if this is too much, which you have, that you don't like that the language is too vague. You called it nebulous regulations, which I'll say. It says the firm has not within the past 3 years been fined in violation of any law applicable to its contracting business. That to me is not nebulous. That to me says they follow the rules and they play by the same rules that everyone else is expected to. So, not paying your taxes, yeah, you shouldn't work on a job until you pay your taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, you're not a responsible person. You're not a responsible business. Callahan doesn't operate like that. I'm a small business owner. I don't operate like that. And I don't expect people to be doing city jobs with taxpayer money who don't pay their taxes, who don't pay their employees correctly, and who don't classify their employees correctly, who don't follow the laws. People breaking the laws should be punished. And that's what the purpose of this is. You've asked us tonight to table this, and that insulted is too strong of a word. It's concerning to me. It's troubling to me that we're being asked to table this, because oftentimes I think, justice slowed down, justice is justice denied. If you slow things down, it's easier to kill things. If you don't push ahead doing the right thing, then the right thing never gets done. I met with Pat Callahan, who's the CEO, president of your company, on August 19th, and we discussed this. And I said, I would love for you guys to come to a meeting, because I had sent him the ordinances, I sent him the measures, and I said, I'd love to get your opinion. And he had some concerns. We got together, we had a cup of coffee, we talked about it. That was 3 months ago. And I'm being asked tonight to table it because now you want to come to the table and discuss it. Mr. Callahan literally sat at my table to discuss it. Said he had some concerns, and I said, love to have you come back and talk about the concerns. We'll work with what your concerns are. But we want this body, in my experience, wants to draft something that's reasonable at all times. We don't want to punish people who shouldn't be punished, and we don't want to, and I don't want to, create a system of over-legislation. However, this is an issue. It's been proven an issue before this body, and we're attempting to find a solution to that issue. So we've had 3 months that it's been laying on the table to tinker with it, and I gladly would have over the course of those 3 months, and I gladly will before it gets passed. But the thought of tabling it, simply putting it in a drawer and saying, well, we'll get to it later, that's just not how the real world works. Nothing gets done. That's a way of getting nothing done, right? If I could, about some of the points you made, so you badge everyone, you collect workers' compensation, insurance proof, and you have a hotline for wage violations, correct?
Correct.
And that's far above the industry standard, right?
Exactly.
And that's terrific that you're doing it. And that's something that your president also told me to do, saying you're meeting many of what, his representation to me was that you're meeting many of what we're seeking to regulate against. You're meeting many of those standards. I was surprised, though, when you said that you brought companies back in who have previously had, I don't know what they were, but you said you brought them back. Those are folks who have had trouble with following these regulations in the past?
I didn't specify.
Okay, so I'm asking. The people you brought back.
It could be a range of issues. It could be a range of issues.
And you bring them back with stipulations and you monitor them more closely, right?
Correct.
So in discussion with our city solicitor today, the purpose of having, I wouldn't call it bag, but I would call it language that is open for interpretation, is to allow the people who are actually making the decisions to make the best decisions based on the case, the facts and circumstances before them. So it doesn't say you have to do, this legislation doesn't say you have to do X, Y, Z in that order. It says if you find a violation, you can shut the job down. It's up to the executive, it's up to the administration, it's up to the compliance officer that Councilor Crowe pointed out we just added to the budget for things just like this in the city of Quincy. It's up to that person to determine the level of severity. You said, is it about someone who forgot to file a form 2 years ago, but they did so and it just hasn't caught up? Well, I think it would be unreasonable. As the drafter of the legislation, I think it would be unreasonable to shut an entire work site down for something so non-nefarious as that. And I trust that any compliance officer would also see it that way. However, if there's individuals who are doing things that we don't want them to be doing, the authority is there to shut the job site down. The ultimate authority to shut the job site down. So, what you see as vague language that causes a problem for you, I see as language that's open for interpretation that allows you and the compliance officer for the city of Quincy and the administration to work together to find solutions. To say, okay, well, what's the solution? You know we have the right to shut you down, so what's your proposed solution? How are you going to rectify it? Go ahead. I didn't really ask that.
I would offer then that you insert a clause that allows for some type of warning period or some type of review by this compliance monitor, if that's who's going to do it, or whoever the individual is, that does not immediately go from 0 to 100, that allows somebody to provide documentation and or paperwork or whatever it may be to get themselves back in good graces.
All right, I propose an amendment to 2016-74, section 9.10. Seventh line. Penalties set forth in 9.17, the building commissioner shall issue a stop work order with respect to all construction work on the entire project until the violation is remedied. I propose that we amend the word shall to read as follows. The building commissioner may, at their discretion, may, comma, at their discretion, comma. That's the only change. Issue a stop work order with respect to all construction work on the entire project until the violation. I think that addresses what, at least one of the concerns that Mr. Morrison's raised.
It would not satisfy me personally, but I understand why you're going there.
Okay, well, hold on for a second, because we're doing some legislating happening up here, so I've offered an amendment.
There's a point of order. Again, given this was supposed to be some information gathering, but before we start launching into amendments based on one person's perspective, I'd like to hear from others in terms of what people
We have some
have to
other
say.
folks who are going to.
Right, so I wouldn't want to vote on an amendment, but heard other people have a chance to weigh in terms of how they feel. Because again, it's just as Mr. Morrison has difficulty with vague things, I have similar feelings where if shall is kind of the word I want, because for too long we've left it to discretion. And I think that we do want to be able to have something that holds fast to what our values are in relation to this. And I'm afraid that leaving it solely to the subjective discretion is not something I'm necessarily. But again, the point should remain the same rather than debating all these things now. If we get everybody's input. So
Fair enough. I'll withdraw the amendment for the time being. I have it written here. And we'll talk to some other folks, but I trust Mr. Morrison with the most lively of conversations we have this evening. So if anyone else, somebody. Councilor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Councilor Fan, but I do just want to point out for us, as a reminder, and also for you, sir, that there is point 9.4.11, which is appeals. And it does say in there that any person aggrieved by a stop work order issued by the building commissioner or his designee pursuant to section 9.4.10 shall have the appeals rights set forth in section 9.1.6. So I think that may be a section that we can look at as well. Just wanted to mention it for consideration.
Thank you, Councilor Lee. So, Ms. Morrison, based on what you have said, your interjection that doesn't satisfy you, and Councilor Finn's concern that it would unnecessarily, paraphrasing, unnecessarily weaken the legislation, I'll withdraw the amendment and won't push it forward. It's not going to make people happy who think that the regulations are too strict, then why do it? A couple other thoughts that I wanted to run past you. I think really if we don't hold the general contractor responsible, which is ultimately what we're doing when we say we would shut down the entire site, then we're continuing with this enforcement method of playing whack-a-mole, right? These companies open up, they don't run a fair shop, they don't run a good business, they don't pay their taxes, they don't carry workers' compensation insurance, and they don't treat their workers fairly, they don't pay them a wage, they don't classify them properly, and then they get fined, people go after them, and they close down the LLC, and they open up a new LLC with, under their wife's name, their brother's name, or quite frankly, even their own name, again. So that's really what we're trying to get after. If we don't hold someone responsible for this, it's a continuing game of three-card Monte where, you can't catch the guys who are doing it because they just disappear when there's an enforcement action. That's what the Attorney General's office wants. That's why and that's what the workers' compensation folks and the Insurance Fraud Bureau folks told us is that they're always moving. They're moving. The people who are doing wrong in your industry are moving quicker than regulators and enforcement officers can catch up with them, unless there are eyes on the ground in local municipalities who can watch these things more closely. And based on what you said tonight, I commend the efforts that Callahan's taken to badge folks, to collect proof of workers' compensation insurance, and to have a hotline for wage violations, but folks aren't doing it. Not every company's doing it. And quite frankly, I don't think that the general contractors are holding their subcontractors accountable enough. And there's clearly a system set up here where the general contractor benefits financially. I'm not saying people are aware of it. They may be. I'm not saying they are. They may be. But they benefit financially from this illegal business practices that we're talking about. Because, as you said, the general contractor bids out the job at cost to the developer, to the whoever's building the project, and then you hire the subs underneath it. So a sub that's charging a lower rate because they're not playing by the rules, because they're not carrying workers' compensation insurance, which the insurance industry at the last meeting raises everybody else who is paying workers' compensation insurance premiums, because workers running their jobs can still make claims against the pool, the workers' compensation pool. Everybody else who has employees that pay into the workers' compensation insurance, they're paying for that. So the guy who's not paying for workers' compensation insurance has a lower starting cost, and therefore he can come to companies like Callahan or other companies and say, this is what I can do it for. And obviously, to some degree, the lower price wins. And obviously, there has to be somebody who can visibly do the job. So there is an incentive for the general contractor to, and I'm not saying it's about Callahan or anyone else specifically, but to either look the other way, turn a blind eye to this, because the financial profits are there. You had said that you wouldn't pay your neighbor's taxes. And I don't think that you should be responsible for paying your neighbor's taxes. However, if you're profiting from your neighbor, and instead of your neighbor paying his taxes, he's giving you the money, then yes, I think the responsibility should be on you to give that money over to the government to pay the taxes. There's some responsibility there. We all have a shared responsibility to make sure people are following the law. That's all I have for you. Are you going to stick around, or are you out of here? Clearly not paid by the hour.
I'll stick around.
You don't have to. It's
Not
okay.
for you, I'm going to stick around.
No, it's okay. It's all right.
Do you want me to or not?
No, you can go. I was just asking. I didn't know if.
Stick around.
Okay. I might talk about when you leave, and then I'll.
I'm sure you will. I'll stick
I'd rather talk about you when you're here, away from the microphone. You can't defend yourself. That's my. But honestly, thank you. I thank Callahan Construction for sending you up here. There were a lot of folks who refused to come, so it says a lot just about you guys being willing to come and tell me how wrong I am. Okay, let's see. Wow, all right, an hour. Next invited guest is the president of Plum House, John Anderson. John? We let him go first so we can really just get our aggression out.
Well, yeah, there won't be much brushing towards me, I can assure you of that.
Thank you for being here. Could you speak kind of close to the microphone? Pull it up there, thanks.
My name is John Anderson. I'm the owner of Plum House. We're a general contractor. We started out just briefly in the 70s when the company was founded as a subcontractor with our own labor force. In the 90s, we turned into doing general contractor work. We became that part of our business. We have 80 partners on the payroll presently. And we go into multi-family apartment buildings.
Have you guys done some work in Quincy?
We haven't done any work in Quincy since early 2000s. And really, the reason I'm coming here is, I think we're all just looking for a level playing field with the underground economy. We have payroll people. We are not exposed to the unlicensed trades. Licensed trades, that's a whole different ball of wax. Is really what the problem is unlicensed trades. We do that work in-house for the most part on our projects. And really, the biggest thing that got my attention is we don't typically work outside of the Plum House bubble, as I say. We were shorthanded with work for our people, and we did a job over in Braintree in re-equipment foundations. And what really got my attention, and I guess this is really why I came, is at the coffee truck. My foreman's over there. We're getting ready to do the foundation, and there was a framing up there, and said they'd never seen you guys before. And they had a little conversation, and I realized they were trying to have our guys go to work for them. And, you know, the deal was, you know, $14 an hour, 60 hours a week, cash money paid on Fridays. They have all the work in the world. And I just wanted to say out loud is that $14 an hour for cash money, you know, for our business. So that's really the biggest thing is, you know, if the city of Quincy could do something to level that out and set standards, that would probably, you know, I would love to.
And just to follow up, thank you for that. The fellow that's paying $14 an hour cash all day long, very likely not paying workers' compensation for those employees, correct?
I don't know how they get around it, but they're clearly getting around it somehow.
Any councilors have any questions? Councilor? And you might.
Essentially, you know, I've heard this stuff referred to in the past as subcontractor scams, basically, in terms of ways of go around, a way of reducing underbidding in terms of specific things. But you think under that, again, it makes it very difficult, first off, I would imagine, that type of scenario, here you're on a setting where people are actually trying to recruit your legally documented and paid employees, and they're trying to recruit them to pay them cash under the table, basically. And that makes it very difficult for companies like yours to be able to compete, correct?
Well, you can't compete with that. And one of the things that's, what's nice about it is we have an ability to retain people. So, you know, our people and employees, you know, the foremen on our carpentry crews, you know, most of those people have been with us for over 10 years plus. You know, we do the benefits and, you know, they're not going anywhere.
The thing I'm struggling with is it's difficult for me to imagine a scenario where construction managers are totally unaware that this is part of the game that exists out there presently in some area. I mean, you're conscious of it yourself. Do you think it's unreasonable for us to want to legislate to hold construction managers responsible for the appropriate enforcement?
You have to, someone has to be held accountable. The one thing I will say is we've done some work out of the state where it's too far for our guys to travel. And one of the things that we wound up doing is getting the, you know, bids for things that we typically do in-house. You know, we have 40 plus years of experience on, you know, putting 2x4 together. It's, you know, takes you the same time as it did back in the 70s as it does now. The other ones and whatnot. We, you know, in our world is, you know, you look at those bids and you know whether the framing work or the siding work. And, you know, down there we had numbers that were remarkably cheaper than the ones that we carried ourselves. You know, what they were doing, we don't know. We never bothered to call them up because we knew this is where it should be. You know, you always have a couple below you. You want to find that happy medium down there.
So there should be some sense in people who are interpreting this that something's amiss if it's coming out in those numbers.
If you're getting multiple bids and stuff, you know, the construction manager, and really, you know, the construction manager is managing that process. He isn't doing that by himself also. There's also an owner involved in that. We don't do a lot of contracts like that, but then there's conversations about that. And, you know, if the number is too low, it's too low. And so,
Thank you.
There's no secrets.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Any other councilors, questions? Well, I appreciate what you had to say. It's part of the reason why we invited 65 people is to get different perspectives. I don't know that any of us are in the construction industry up here. We all come from different fields, we have different backgrounds, and you know, through the process of these hearings, something's been brought to our attention that's a problem. We're doing the best we can as legislators to solve that problem in a fair and responsible way. So it's helpful to get people who are in the industry, who know the day-to-day, know how it works, to provide input, whether it's positive or negative. Negative input, we're happy to, you know, try and craft something that works. Now, what about the? That's right. Okay. I appreciate that. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Did you? You're aware of what the body was legislation would do and the parameters of it? That makes sense. And any other thoughts or concerns about the legislation specifically?
You know, the only thing that I would say is, if, you know, if this goes through and there is a violation, I don't think you should go to 100 miles an hour right out the gate. I think there should be a halfway step there. That's the only thing I would suggest. Because even with people paying attention and focusing on that, you know, things can be biting.
And certainly, there are a lot of reasons why a company that has a track record of being a good, responsible employer can fall in rough time. You know, a lot of these are family businesses. Folks can get sick. You know, the person who runs the payroll, you know, Aunt Jane can get sick, and then, you know, things get backed up, and you got, you know, guys who are used to putting up drywall are now in charge of the payroll. And I can understand that, and I appreciate your comments as far as not shutting down a project over some ticky-tacky violation. So we'll certainly, as the author of this, I'll certainly look to see if we can flesh that out to make sure that that's not the intent of this body. Is that there should be some reasonableness based on facts and circumstances that the compliance officer finds at the time of any particular violation. That they can take that into consideration. So thank you very much for this. I spoke earlier to Bob Rizzi, the Norfolk Labor Council, who told me he had an issue. He wasn't going to be able to be here tonight. Don't see him here. He was next on my list to speak. Just going through my list, a couple more people. Amelia Finney, business representative from New England Regional Council of Carpenters.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. That's right.
Looks like I don't get reading your secret notes there.
Thank you, sir. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Good evening, and thanks for having us here tonight. I just want to say I commend this committee for taking on this important issue. It affects us all as taxpayers. I think this proposal is an important step in the right direction. And I do, as city councilors, are taking an opportunity here to make a real change that has a positive impact on construction in Quincy. And I think in doing so, you are setting a great example for other local communities and governments. I think the proposal is simple. It's about doing what's right. It's about common sense. It's about keeping things in check in an industry that is flailing wildly out of control. It means a lot to me personally because I started working as a carpenter at the age of 17 and I fell in love with the trade. And as a single parent, I've found that with a lot of hard work, I've been able to provide a solid middle-class life for myself and my daughter. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity. But I'm saddened to see the industry changing for the worse with the use of these contractors who violate basic federal employment laws, misclassify workers, skip out on taxes, and save money by neglecting to comply with safety regulations and don't carry the proper insurance policies. It results in a huge loss for all of us. It's a huge loss in tax revenue to the state, an estimated $187 million over 3 years. That's money that could be used to fix our failing infrastructure or to rebuild our public schools. It's a huge loss to the insurance industry, which they have to make up for by increasing rates on the rest of us. And as you've heard here tonight, it's a huge loss to honest contractors, both union and non-union, who are at a 35% disadvantage right from the start just for complying with the law. This will help honest contractors secure work, and it will help to ensure that the people who build these structures are gainfully employed and have a much better chance of going home safely to their families at the end of the day. So there's an ongoing trend that I'm sure you're aware of here in the Metro Boston area, which is the building of these large multi-unit structures.
You noticed.
You noticed? I know.
Not me.
This is expected to continue. whereas we have had approximately 172,000 newcomers move to the area between 2010 and 2014, with only 1,500 new units built in the area in those same years. This is all information that I found on the Boston Housing Report Card, which is published every year at Northeastern University. According to the City of Boston, 4,700 new residents will need to be housed each year to meet population projections for the year 2030. Quincy is a very attractive option for many of these newcomers. It's been praised in Boston Magazine for as being one of the top 14 best places to live in Massachusetts.
We know how awesome.
I know. You guys are what makes it Boston. It's close to downtown Boston, right on the red line. Go to the beach, go for a hike in the mountains. You know, not in Quincy, but pretty close.
No, it's Quincy. We're the largest portion of the Blue Hills Reservation.
Okay, I stand corrected.
It's Ward 4, actually, in case.
So, we've already seen a huge increase in housing here in Quincy, but we will see more. And that will only solve half the problem. When the median income is approximately $2,500 a month, a household needs to have an annual income of approximately $100,000 or $50 an hour in order to afford that without putting a huge strain on the family finances. And this measure, I think, helps to close that gap by ensuring the use of legitimate contractors who pay a fair living wage. And as far as the excuse or suggestion that...
We call it concern.
Concern, thank you. As far as the concern that costs will be too high or that it will stop development in Quincy, I don't buy that excuse or that concern. I think to say that shows a total lack of respect for the law and just isn't true. In recent studies done on housing costs in Greater Boston, the data shows us that construction costs, including labor and material, account for approximately 59% of the total development cost. Land cost is approximately 18%, and soft costs are approximately 22%. Soft costs are financing and legal fees. What is striking about that number, or those numbers, is that over the last decade, the construction costs have only risen 6%, which is only 3/5 the rate of inflation. In that same time, the cost of land acquisition has skyrocketed 42%, or 4.4 times faster than the rate of inflation, and financing costs have climbed 5.4 times faster. So it isn't right to simply push those higher land acquisition and financing costs off onto workers and taxpayers by allowing contractors to cheat. It's wrong, and it'll never solve the problem. So again, I commend you all for taking up this issue and for having us here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here is not allow contractors or anyone else in the construction industry to cheat. Union, non-union, whatever they are, hold everyone to the same legal standard. Councilors, have any questions? Amelia? Thank you, Amelia.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just a comment, thank you.
Councilman.
Oh, just thank you for coming up. Very nice presentation, very complete, smooth. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel.
Next on the thing, Councilman, next on the list, Sean, business agent for Local 7.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. I don't think there's anybody in this room who's not on board with the first order, the misclassification of employees on construction sites. I think everybody here in this room is on board with that. I just have a couple of concerns. I hope I don't get beat up as bad as the last guy did because I see concerns. I didn't know this, well, I didn't know that this was I think we were told that this wasn't going to be a beat up anybody session, but it doesn't
Do
seem
you
to be
feel
going.
beat up, sir?
No, I feel like you're beating somebody up.
Well, if you feel beat up, you let me know, okay?
Yeah, all right. I will let you know.
I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
All right, no problem. first of all, like I said, I applaud your efforts, really. We have organizers, we have industry analysts that go out every day, that work for Local 7, that do this job, that chase cheating contractors around. So we've worked very closely with George Noel under Governor Deval Patrick when he ran the underground economy. We worked very closely with the AG's office, and what happens is we have to go out and do all the legwork. We have to find the cheaters. We have to wrap it up in a bowl and bring it to the Attorney General, and then we have to wait to see what they're gonna do. So we do all the legwork and hand it to the Attorney General. So I have a couple of concerns or questions on order number 201674. I go to the second page, 949. I'll go down to number 2. It says the firm. And I'd just like to say one thing. We do a lot of organizing in the union construction industry. So the past 3 years, we could have signed contractors. I think we might have signed, our organizers here now over the past 3 years, we might have signed 20 or 30 contractors that were open shop at one point that are now union, that may have had some type of violation, but not disbarred. So that's going to eliminate them from bidding on these projects if they had any violation at all. That's by the way I'm reading this, correct?
I don't believe so, but go on.
Okay, so my second, down to number 2, the firm. In my, I just don't think that the firm is spelled out exactly who the firm is. Is it the GC? Is it the sub? Is it the sub to the sub, or is it all of them? That's one question that I have, or concern. It's not clearly defined the way I read it. Number 3, the firm must maintain appropriate industrial accident insurance sufficient to provide coverage for all employees on the project in accordance with General Law C-152 and provide proof of such coverage to the building inspector. That's state law. Every general contractor, CM, has to turn this into the city and town clerk, and it goes to the state industrial accident board. So it's already a state law. So that's one of the other questions, that's one question. Another question that I have is why the redundancy? And another thing that I'd like to say is, it seems that it almost sounds like you want to have each general contractor have a wrap-up total workman's comp policy. That just seems to be what this is saying to me. Because this is an industry-wide problem with the cheating. The CM can sign a contract with any subcontractor. They can show them proof of workers' compensation, and 3 days later they can cancel it. And you don't know about it unless you're going to the W-Grip site every day, checking to make sure that they have the right workers' comp policy. And on the other end, it's hard to find out if they're cheating until they do their audit every year. So in our industry, they could say that they're only erecting 2 floors of steel and below, or 2 floors of steel and above. What we find is our organizers go out, they monitor the jobs, they watch what they're doing. Now they're taking pictures of jobs that are going 10 floors. So you have to wait till the audit comes through, and it can take up to a year to find out that they audited that they only did 2 floors. So they've been cheating the whole year, but you can't find out until the audit. So it's so much legwork that I think you're putting a lot of legwork onto the GC and construction manager. As far as the next one that I have a question or a concern about, order number 016137. On page, it's on the 4th page, number 4. to the extent required, as set forth below, all city contractors shall maintain a wage bond for the term of the contract with the city. I would just like to say that if you're a highly capitalized company, you can go get a bond and pay 2% on that bond. You can walk right into any bond company, you're a highly capitalized company, pay 2% on that bond and be bonded. If you're a smaller mom and pop shop, and we have hundreds of them in the building trades, many of them that bid on projects in Quincy, if they have to post a bond for, say, $100,000, they have to come up. They're not bad contractors, they just don't have the capital. They have to come up with $100,000, put it in escrow, and then they're probably paying a 6 or 7% fee on that bond.
I think you call it interest.
Well,
I know a guy who calls it that.
it's not yeah, you beat me up a little bit. All right, I'm getting beat up right now. Thanks. But I'm not trying to be rude. This just seems to be that it wasn't going to be a beat-up session, and I'm glad. I think that it turned into one. But I'm up here to say that this could hurt a lot of smaller companies that give more competitive pricing to the GCs and to the CMs. So I would just like to see if there are going to be changes made. Do you plan on having a committee sit down? And if so, people from labor or people from some of the general contractors going to be on that committee?
You asking me? That's what we're doing now. This is the discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. We've had folks come to the last 2 hearings too, but happy to.
Well, I was at the last one. I wasn't at the first one when the insurance company spoke, and they spoke about the private right of action law.
Right. Very interesting stuff.
It is very interesting, and we use that a lot in Local 7 to go after cheating contracts, so that we can still keep the power within our hands to go after cheating contractors and not always rely on the state, because a lot of times you don't get the result from the state that you want. They just give them a slap on the wrist and let them walk away. So we'd like to keep some of that power in our own hands.
Thank you. Yeah, I like your friend. Don't go with this. Now we get to beat you up.
Good.
I'll go to you in a second, Joe. I just want to follow up on one of the things you said about the wage bond. So can you flesh that out a little bit for me? Well, I'll run through each of the things you said. Definition of firm, you didn't feel as though that was clearly defined. That's reasonable. Yeah, I was looking through, there isn't a definition section, so we can probably add that and flesh out exactly what we need a little bit more. We can do a better job of that. You asked why the redundancy in terms of compliance with workers' comp coverage if it's already a state law. It's already a state law, but the AG, who's tasked with enforcing that law, came before us and said they can't keep up with it, and they would encourage the help from municipalities. So we don't have the power in a local municipality to enforce a state law unless we put some sort of provision in our local ordinances that say you have to comply with that, because then we don't get you we get you for the non-compliance, not the law. You understand? So it's not a redundancy. It's essentially bootstrapping our ability to go after the same thing that the AG goes after on their level. We go after compliance with the law, where they're going after the law. So it's not necessarily a redundancy. It's just the way for the local municipality to have something to do with that particular issue. So that's the answer to that one. And then lastly, do you want us to wait?
Sorry.
Good.
There was a guy that I owe.
Some big, yeah.
I might be able to help you out.
Oversight meetings are notorious. So the wage bond, that's interesting. No one had brought that up yet. And I'm just curious if you're in a position to talk a little bit more about that. We wouldn't want to hurt smaller companies. So what's the remedy to that? I mean, do you think you don't hold a bond at all, or you make it a percentage, or what? I mean, what do you
think that the general contractor and the CM already have to hold that bond, so that the workers are already protected from wage theft.
So
they're already bonded for that, the general contractor or the construction manager.
So even though I wrote it, I still have to read it to figure out what I'm trying to say. So the definition of, so what we're talking about there is city contractors. The definition of city contractor is an employer who holds or seeks to hold a contract for goods, services, or labor with the city. But I don't, I'm kind of thinking aloud, I'm wondering if that isn't the GC that we're talking about here. Because only the GC would hold the contract with the city. The subs would hold a contract with the GC. So I think what we're saying there, and I could be wrong, and if it's not clear enough for you and I to figure it out talking, then it probably needs to be fixed. But I think what we're talking about there is that you're saying that the GC has to hold it, not the subs, that they wouldn't have to hold it up. I think.
Yeah.
But then, and that
Because
would,
it would put a lot of the smaller mom and pop shops, and that's a lot of our industry is a lot of smaller contractors. It would limit their ability, first of all, to bid on the job. Second of all, the people that are working for them would be out of work because they're limited to what jobs they can bid on in the city of Quincy, or they would put an ordinance.
I get it. We don't want to put an unfair financial burden on folks who can at least afford to pay. So
And
I
those
think
are the
it's
people
talking
that
about
will give
general.
you the best bids as far as value goes.
Right. Okay. Sorry, I spoke first. Yeah, I can't. Councilor Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but I really want to just go back to that. What provision you were reciting, where was it in relation to the bonds?
It's on page 4 of order number 2016137. It's on number 4,
Section C.
section C.
Got it, all right, terrific, thanks. Any follow-up?
Good, Councilor Beck?
No, I just really wanted to certain where you're from.
Thank you. Any other councilors have anything for Sean? No? Okay. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean.
Okay, and then I think our last known person who needs to be Justin Desmond, representative from the Painters and Allied Trades. Good evening, Justin.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the committee for having us tonight. I'm actually a Quincy resident. I live in the city. I'm a representative for the Painters.
So you also know how awesome it is.
I do know. Kids are Quincy guys, so.
Good.
We're here to tonight to support the order related to the underground economy, misclassification of workers on construction sites. With the large amount of construction happening and permitted in the city of Quincy, this order will help to protect workers' wages and the city and state from losing much needed tax revenue. By eliminating this classification, it puts all companies on an even playing field during the bidding process, giving honest contractors the opportunity to obtain projects that will create better working conditions for Quincy and Massachusetts workers. We as a council have been working with many different contractors, open shop contractors and union contractors in and around the city in the hope of eliminating wage theft in the state, across the state, not just in the city. Most recently, our contractors and our district council have been working with Callahan Construction, who spoke earlier. And with that, we feel that it shows that we can all work together in the right direction to end wage theft. Because for us, we do the compliance for our own contractors. So they're not cheating. We know, we get all their records, everything is on file. So by showing that everyone can work together, open shop, union shops, if everyone can work together to end wage theft, it's only going to help to support and stop the work misclassification. That's just a statement I have.
Thank you. Any thoughts or input on any specifics of the legislation? And I don't know.
Yeah, I just don't have it in front of me, so for specifics.
Sure,
but,
okay.
I mean, a lot of people covered a lot of things today, so I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of talks after, and we'll be happy to be involved.
That's the benefit of going last, you don't have to say.
Yeah, it's easy. Let's
Yeah.
blow it up.
Anybody have any thoughts, questions, comments? Thank you very much. I know there are some other union representatives who are in the audience. I don't know if anybody who didn't tell me they were going to speak wanted to. No. Okay. All right. I don't know if any of the councilors have any thoughts, comments, questions, deliberation. Open it up. Councilor Penn?
If we could, I'd like to have the city solicitor, if he could, if he's available, just some
here. Greetings, Jim. You don't know, you can't talk from up here, you have to go down there. Before you talk, if I could just say, I know, sir, you were going to speak, but we will be having, because this is a zoning matter, we will be having a public hearing on the, I think both of them, possibly only one of them, but we will be having a required public hearing at the time, likely before the full body, so we would take testimony from anybody who wanted to speak in favor, in opposition, or just talk to us. So, thank you. Solicitor Timmons.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Timmons, have you had a chance to review this?
I have.
In relation, I have a couple of just very kind of general questions, but one thing is, first and foremost, I guess the question that have to be clear about is that there's nothing in this particular this ordinance, but again, I forgot the conjunction. There's nothing in this specifically that this is not related in any way, shape, or form to the current conjunctions that we've had related to previous legislation.
Correct. I have reviewed that, and I've reviewed the judgment in the Merit Alliance case, and it's something I've talked about with Council Calhoun. I'm happy to send it around for you,
Right.
so you can each make your own independent judgment. But I believe that there's nothing conflicting here,
Right.
and that to the extent there might be areas that might be of concern, we could clean them up so that there's not even a hint of conflict. But I'm quite comfortable about that.
There have also been some suggestions, I'm sure you've heard, listening to various testimony this evening in terms of overgeneralized language or vague language or something. Have you some opinions related to that, or are you going to examine that?
Yes, I do have some concerns about that. Councilor Calhoun referenced a conversation that he and I had, and I'm comfortable we can work through the language, but one of the speakers referenced concerns about some of the language being overly vague in section 9.49, and frankly, I do have some of those same concerns, like subparagraph 2. It talks about a firm, and it says, been found in violation. I'd like that a little bit more clarified about what the nature of the violation finding might be, who makes that finding, etc. And then it says, of any law applicable to its contracting business, including but not limited to, and goes on to end with the word or others. The problem we have is, and I believe you were alluding to this in earlier comments, is the issue of an unlawful delegation of zoning authority. The city used to have an ordinance on its books regarding a building that is substantially destroyed, that it would lose its non-conforming rights. And the example I would use is the case that we went through, where a rooming house burned to the ground. The rooming house was up on President's Hill, and it was essentially one of the grand old homes on President's Hill and been converted to a rooming house. When it burned to the ground, the neighbors weren't exactly upset about that fact. When the property owner came before the zoning board to rebuild, he was denied the ability to rebuild because the city found that because it was substantially destroyed, that it had lost its non-conforming rights. Well, the court struck down our ordinance and reversed the order based on the fact that the substantially destroyed standard left too much discretion in the hands of the building inspector and then the zoning board, and that his finding, and it's a correct one, is that you're limiting these two specific parties to making certain findings that either the state under Chapter 40A or this body in our zoning ordinance very specifically lay out.
So in other words, the tighter the language, the better.
Correct, yes. So the concern is that when you have language like this, I heard from Councilor Palmucci today his perspective on it and his motivation for it, and I do believe we can perhaps clean up some of the language a little bit so that that motivation can be achieved. He wants to make certain that we don't necessarily box in someone who can clear up a problem quickly. If something's identified on a particular day and it can be cleaned up, there has to be some discretion to act, and I do understand that. But my concern is if we leave language like this in the ordinance, then that entire paragraph would be strict. And I know that was something you were alluding to earlier. So those are the types of things that I will now have to go through and clean up, probably working with the chair. And I'm very happy to accept input from any of the interested parties who are here tonight and have spoken.
And towards that end, I'm sure you could benefit if, particularly those who spoke, if they could put those comments in writing, that would be beneficial, would it not?
Yes. I haven't done a written advisory yet for a couple of different reasons.
No, but I meant for you to see how people who perhaps spoke tonight, if they want to say anything.
Oh, yes.
But the last question I have is bottom line is to make certain, again, because there's kind of some allusion to this, but there's really nothing in this that's the council overstepping its jurisdiction.
Well, the council overstepping its jurisdiction, no. The council perhaps misapplying, I do have a concern. And that's something that I'm still working through again with. I was working through with the chair who drafted the legislation. And I'm happy to talk to any affected parties, but what I wanted to read tonight, just to give you consideration about one of the real underlying legal issues. The last gentleman who spoke, I think, said it best when he said everyone in the room agrees with the theme here this evening. And the problem is achieving a proper remedy. The reason this is such a systemic problem, and it's across the state, and it's been going on for years, is because it's very difficult to craft a remedy. We're all focused on the problem, we're trying to craft a remedy, but unfortunately, the Constitution gets in the way sometimes. And that happened in the Merrill Lyons case somewhat. I think we were trying to do something that I don't think should have been as problematic as it was found to be, but it was deemed unconstitutional. And just I want to read to you one little quote from the Zoning Enabling Act, the purpose of zoning. And this is where my concern about the statute coming in as an amendment to our zoning ordinance lies. The purpose of zoning, it says, as used in this chapter, shall mean ordinances adopted by cities to regulate the use of land, buildings, and structures, and to protect the health, safety, and general welfare of their present and future inhabitants. So the purpose of zoning law is to address issues relating to the land, the buildings on the land, and the people who live in the buildings. They use the word inhabitants. The problem here is we are trying to protect the workers on the projects who construct these buildings. And I'm not certain that that's the proper use of the zoning power. It's an issue I've raised with Councilor Palmucci, and he's aware of it, and what we've agreed to do. I'm looking to work through the Attorney General's office to explore that. But what I want to avoid, what I know the council would wish to avoid, and what I've discussed with the mayor, and he certainly wants to avoid, is we don't want to enact something like the responsible employer ordinance that this council enacted when we first came in, when the mayor's administration first came in.
I drafted that too.
Pardon?
I drafted that too. It was the first thing I did as council.
thought you were in grammar school.
Yeah, no.
Because of your youthful look. Right. Well, that ordinance, as admirable as it was and as effective as it was ultimately stricken. And so we don't want to go down that same road. We've learned a lot about how to address these issues. And so I think that the proper concerns are up on the screen, and we're just going to take a longer look at them. Part of what we're doing here now is through the testimony presented and some of the refinements that flow from that, we'll try to address these broader issues.
This could be achieve the same objective if it were created as an ordinance outside the zone?
Yes, it may be that we shift it outside of the zoning ordinance, but then the issue becomes the kind of the police power. The real meat of this ordinance is the sort of Damocles going in and shutting down the project. That's the remedy that folks are hoping helps bring a stop to this practice. The problem with that is that the remedy has wide-ranging impacts, and that doctrine of unintended consequences gets triggered. You know, you have some, sub who, let's say it's a public project, and we have to take the lowest eligible responsible bidder, and someone slides in the door on a smaller subcontract, and it turns out that they're just, they're not good people, they foul up, and we end up shutting down a project at a point in time when scheduling is critical, when one of these particular unions may have 25 people on the job, and now they all have to go home. Who pays for the lost time while this contractor's foolishness gets remedied? Those are some of the things that need to be looked at. So how we wield that sword, and whether we do it through the zoning power, a full shutdown of the project, those are the things that I think we need to refine.
Well, clearly, this is an area I think the city could afford some soul searching itself, quite honestly, in terms of our own monitoring of that. To the extent that this is going to achieve that hopefully is one of the ultimate goals here, correct? In the sense that, we just can't continue this posture of just ignoring something that's fundamentally wrong or allow it to continue. We need to have something in place that addresses these things, and we can't just keep turning blind eyes to it where it does exist. I mean, even in the zoning process, we've heard some very powerful testimony of people coming up and what's taking place, including people not getting paid, very difficult, safety situations, including people dying on work sites and like. So, to the extent that we can clean this up and move it, get it moving, is, in my opinion, a first step. And I just want to make certain that there aren't any immediate poison pills within it that prevent us from achieving that ultimate objective. And so I guess to that extent, I think the point that the chairman made is essentially we're not saying that we're structuring these laws. What we're saying is we're holding people to accountability to those laws. That's well within our scope to be able to do that, right?
Right, and I do understand that, and it's a question of how you, quote, hold people accountable, close quote. Because there's one other little issue here that I discussed with Councilor Palmucci that I was going to raise as well, is that comparing private contracts is an issue, and we have there's a particular case out of the city of Worcester where they came up with a Human Rights Commission back in the 70s, and they gave that commission certain authority to conduct hearings and issue subpoenas in order to enforce fundamental human rights. Well, in reviewing all that, the court got into different issues like what happens if the human rights issue is one of housing, and you're getting into the contract between a landlord and a tenant. Well, we're looking here to get into some of the private contracts, like the first speaker from Callahan. I'm familiar with their YMCA project. That was a private project, a project on Bergen Parkway. And our ability to use the zoning power, or really any municipal power, to get into a private boardroom and affect private contracts, that's very limited, very circumscribed. So that's another thing we have to look at as well.
And you said you're going to consult the Attorney General's office in relation to some of these issues.
Excuse me?
Did I hear you earlier say you're going to consult with the Attorney General's office? In terms of some
Yes,
of these
yes.
issues?
I'm in the process of doing that to try to get some feedback. A very similar bill is pending up at the State House. It's working its way through the State House, and there's been some analysis that has done up there, so we're trying to look at that. It's a little more limited, and we're trying to get some input, and there's a kind of a collective look at this to try to make certain that if something that's on the books in a municipality is going to withstand a legal challenge. That's all we're trying to do. One other point to your concern, and it dovetails with my talk about private contract a moment ago. I called our newly hired municipal compliance officer. Again, after talking with our chairman, Council Palmucci, just trying to flesh out how exactly he operates and what types of things he's doing. Well, he talked to me about the fact that he will go on a private job site. He was on a private job here in Quincy where he asked the employees on site who were part of a trade that required licenses. He asked them to produce their licenses. People did so. One gentleman produced a passport. And when he tried to engage him in a discussion saying, I want your license, not your passport, the man couldn't communicate with him. So he was removed from the job at that time, immediately. The compliance officer went back several times and did some follow-up on that particular incident. So that was one example. And then he told me about a problem example where he went to a job where there were electric trades on site, and there's an issue with classification between journeyman and apprentice. And what happened was, in his opinion, he was on the first floor, and they knew he was there, and by the time he got up to the third floor of the building, there were a bunch of guys there with brooms, pushing brooms, saying that they were cleaning up some work, and he saw all wire that clearly was being pulled on the job. So he felt that it was a clear example of people trying to hold themselves out as doing apprentice work. And he said that's the daunting task that he has, that he's there on site and then word gets passed through. So the city is trying affirmatively to get out there and enforce, but there are still issues that flow from, notwithstanding the existence of laws on the books, as that last speaker pointed out. So we're going to do what we can and keep working on it. But there's still
Well, it'll be
some
interesting
work
to see any proposed state legislation that proposes in giving municipalities the additional tools in terms of.
Say that again, I'm
I
sorry.
said it would be, again, I haven't had a chance to review any of the state legislation, but it would seem to make sense if it empowered local municipalities with a few extra set of tools to be able to monitor this the same way.
Yeah, it doesn't. The authority is with the Attorney General, the enforcement authority, from what I can see. And I know that's one of the issues, because I agree with that gentleman. I understand exactly what he's talking about, because on occasions when we had problems on city jobs back in 08, 09, it was generally someone coming forward with compiled information and presented it to us. It was not the result of any other sort of independent investigation. So there are those issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Finn. Anybody else? Oh, before you go, I'll go easy.
We're all excited.
As always, I'm left. Deep.
You should know the line and work out.
I should. I swim there. That's not my aggression. I didn't go today. Just as it relates to some of the things that we talked about, again, the vagueness of the wording was to allow for interpretation from the executive branch, which normally I would think you would jump at, but in this particular instance, perhaps things should be tightened up. I wanted to ask you, would there be a benefit to drafting a set of administrative guidelines to accompany this? So we've heard some concerns tonight, some ours and some others, about the kind of the nuclear option, shutting the job site down. Would there be some benefit to referencing in the ordinance guidelines that a compliance officer would use, and then there would be a policy that wouldn't necessarily be something this body adopted, but that the executive would utilize to implement this rule that had the guidelines, perhaps had a tiered approach of, for lack of a better word, discipline, but actions that they could take in response to certain things. And it would better flesh out the discretion that they could apply in different kind of levers that they can pull. Would that?
Yes, I think that would be helpful. Because my primary concern with this, looking at it, the remedy section of 9410, was that because of the sins of one contractor, an entire project is going to get, and all the workers are going to get wiped out. And I know when we did Central Middle School, one of the problems we had was sequencing the job. And if one of the contractors got delayed for a week, and then someone got bounced out, they weren't coming back the next Monday. They would be coming back 3.5 weeks later. And then that set off whoever has to wait until that contract was done. So there's a lot of different things that can happen if you shut down a job for a day. And I do think something like what you were talking about would be good. I'd like to go after more individual targets. One of the things after we talked, we had an ABCC hearing today, and the ABCC in the licensing realm, they're very particular. All individual interests in an alcohol license have to be identified because they're concerned about who's financing bars and whatnot. Well, with the type of record, legislative record that exists here about the issue that exists, I think if we start to identify the individuals who open up these LLCs, going from year to year and city to city, that would be hopefully an effective tool as well. So there are things like that, I do think, and perhaps more specific regulations and guidelines as far as enforcement would be helpful.
And just, I actually don't think we would ever shut a job down. So I liken this to the ordinance that this body passed, the police detail ordinance for troublesome properties. So we saw a problem, had hearings, saw a problem that these properties run usually by absentee landlords. They get dirtbag tenants in there, breaking the law, doing God knows what. The neighbors have to watch this every day, calling the police. Every day this thing's going on. And the landlords know where to be found because they have no financial interest in resolving problems because they get their rent check every month, whatever. And they don't have to live next to this property. So this body passed legislation that said, okay, well, if there's a certain number of police calls at the same property within a given within a given time period of 6 months, there's like 8 calls in 6 months, or I forget what the numbers are, then the city of Quincy can notify the landlord, put them on warning, and say the next time it happens, the next time there's a call, we're going to put a police detail in front of the house to keep the peace. And they did it once, and the guy never paid the detail, so the police chief never did it again because it was only costing the taxpayers more money. So we wrote an amendment to that and said we would place the cost of the detail onto the tax bill. Not once since then have they ever had to put a detail in front of the house. Because the landlords realize there's no way out of this. If they don't get rid of the tenant, if they don't clean up the property so that police calls stop getting made about the property, then they're going to pay. And I liken that to this, that when you said it's about getting into a private contract between people, I don't think so. I really believe that what will happen here is general contractors will look at this and they'll say, what the heck is Quincy doing? That's pretty draconian. We better avoid that problem at all costs. And they will hold people responsible, and they'll start looking harder at the subcontractors and holding them responsible so that their job is never shut down. So it becomes a remedy or a solution that's never implemented because the threat of it is all that is needed. I think that's what happened, but that's,
No, understood.
but again, we still needed to pass constitutional muster. You lawyers and your constitution.
Right, it's regrettable.
Anybody else have any thoughts, questions, comments? Thank you, Mr. Timmons.
Thank you.
I think at this point we'll adjourn. It sounds like we're probably not.
I'll second.
Yeah. Well, hold on a second. But I like the initiative. I think we got some work to do on this. Hopefully, what we can do is go back to the drawing board a little bit, and take the concerns and comments that were given tonight. Morris, thank you. You're dismissed now. And we'll rework something. We'll bring it out at a full council meeting. On Councilor Harris's motion to adjourn.
I already